Welcome to Mr. Bob's Railroad Workbench, where we talk about math, science, history, and trains, and do it all with some very fun activities. Hello, I'm Mr. Bob Luttenberger, Education Director for the National Railroad Museum. If you're watching us on Facebook Live and want to type in a question, feel free to do so. We'll answer those after the segment. If you would just like to type in and let us know who you are and where you are watching from, please feel free to do that as well. Also, make sure that you like the National Railroad Museum's page on Facebook. Well, today, Mr. Bob's in the doghouse. No, not quite like this pup. We're talking the doghouse on the back of a steam locomotive tender. Kind of like this one right here. When you visit the National Railroad Museum and you go out to our McCormick Train Pavilion, sitting right next to the Aero Train is Duluth, Mesabi, and Iron Range number 506. It's a steam locomotive built back in 1916, used to haul iron ore in Michigan and into Duluth, into the harbors there. And normally you look at the front of the locomotive, but today we're going to take a look at the back, and you'll notice on the tender on Duluth, Mesabi 506, there happens to be a doghouse. So, why do we have a doghouse on a steam locomotive? Well, here's kind of the story. The cab on most steam locomotives was pretty small. A seat for the engineer and a seat for the fireman and not much else. But trains before air brakes required a crew of 5. An engineer, a fireman, a head-end brakeman, a rear brakeman, and a conductor. And what this meant is that those 2 brakemen, in order to slow or stop the train, needed to move out across the cars in the train and turn the individual brake wheels to slow the cars down one by one and eventually bring the train to a stop. As you can imagine, it's a pretty dangerous job for the brakeman walking across a moving train. Also, a brakeman could only handle a few cars in a train effectively in order to slow things or stop things in the needed time. Well, as air brakes came about, obviously we did not need those brakemen anymore to do their jobs. However, railroad unions wanted to preserve the position of the railroad brakeman, and so starting in 1937, an agreement was struck that if a locomotive, a steam locomotive, was to have a major servicing or a new steam locomotive was built, a place had to be made for that head-end brakeman to sit. Before this, he was in the way in the cab. The fireman may have been needing to shovel coal. That would have caused a problem, so that head brakeman may have rode out on the back of the tender, may have rode in the coal bunker, may have stood on the gangway, all very uncomfortable and slightly dangerous spots. So, starting in 37, railroads were required to put a doghouse on the tender or an extra seat in the cab to accommodate that brakeman. The doghouse, as you see here on this Norfolk and Western engine on the back of the tender, was something that had to be enclosed. It had to have a seat for that brakeman, and usually they were heated to keep the brakeman warm. So the Duluth, Mesabi, and Iron Range was not the only railroad to use doghouses on their tenders. Norfolk and Western, as we noted here. The Pennsylvania Railroad also used doghouses. In fact, they took theirs to kind of an extreme. Their doghouse was placed at the rear of the tender, so the brakeman did not have as far to walk. It was also streamlined and set down into the tender just a little bit. Of course, some doghouses, well, they were just that, a doghouse. This Southern Pacific locomotive with what's called a Vanderbilt tender, well, the doghouse was squeezed in about the only place it could, and you'll notice it's a lot smaller than the other 2 that we just looked at, and probably a little bit more uncomfortable for that brakeman there on the side of the tender. So next time you visit the National Railroad Museum and see locomotive number 506 from the Duluth, Mesabi, and Iron Range, make sure you walk around to the back, look at the tender, and inspect that doghouse, and imagine what it would be like for the brakeman to be riding out there trying to do his job. A little bit about doghouses and, well, how to end up in one on a steam locomotive. You know what? At the National Railroad Museum, it's our mission to inspire lifelong learning by preserving railroad objects, providing engaging exhibits and innovative programs. As a nonprofit organization, the National Railroad Museum is supported by both public and private donations and, of course, by our museum members. If you'd like more information on how you can support the National Railroad Museum or become a museum member, make sure you visit our website, nationalrrmuseum.org. Hey, I'm Mr. Bob. Thanks for stopping by Mr. Bob's Railroad Workbench. And I'm going to try to stay out of the doghouse until we see you again.